Americans sold the Australians a bunch of FA-18 fighter planes in the 1980s. So this is a book by Peter Hall and Robert Wiley, Economics of War and Peace. There is something called a passive radar warning receiver, one of the most essential elements of the electronic weaponry suite of the aircraft. The United States controls radar warning technology. The Australians acquired about 75 of these aircraft. The Americans, RWRs in the Australian fighter planes, were configured for operations against Warsaw Pact forces, means the USSR and its satellite nation. They were not programmed to detect radar emissions of US and other Western origin aircraft operating in Southeast Asia. In the case of the FA-18, the threat library was embedded in the system's hardwired programmable system processor, and the US government denied Australian government requests for access to the algorithms that determined the operations of the processors and hence which radar frequencies it could see. So essentially, the radar of the Hornet could not identify most of the aircraft in this region as hostile. The Australian front-end fighter plane could not shoot down people who might be Australia's enemies in the region. The Americans knew this and they denied access to the algorithm. The Australians eventually claim, they said that in the end we spied on them and we extracted the codes ourselves. Here's the claim. This is from the Wayback Machine. This article has been deleted from the internet, but I was able to find it. So this is the claim that Australia cracked top secret US fighter jet codes, that Australia is essentially a US corporation. Australia essentially is owned by the US. It's one of their closest allies. It's essentially a US possession. And yet the Americans denied the Australians these codes. If the Americans could do this to one of their closest allies, do you think they would not do that to India?
It's established they can control weapons with coding, and they do control weapons with coding. As I just said, if they could do it to Australia, they'll do it to anyone. So let's apply that situation to what's going on today. Specifically, control how weapons are used. BBC headline, Ukraine, US and European countries pledge heavy weapons. In the article at the bottom, it's in which 50 countries are set to coordinate arms supplies. I think that includes Australia as well as European nations. The Germans are coughing up Leopard tanks, particularly in the light of the Nord Stream 2 just being blown up and having decisions made for them that they may not have made themselves. I think the German people and even a few of the German politicians are starting to second guess everything that's going on. And this call to disarm their nation, because that's what they're doing, they're emptying all the weapons out of all of these European nations. I think what's being sold to them now is, oh, listen, we'll get all these new weapons from America, we're all part of NATO, we're all allies, here you go. And as with the F-18s that were sold to Australia, they could certainly control how they were operated using computer code. Well, that's multiplied many times, and software is included in all particularly sophisticated weapon systems. So if a European nation gets into a border stoush with another European nation, the Americans will either not let any weapons be used, or they'll switch the weapons on of the country who's in their favour. And the people behind this warmongering lunatic will be calling the shots. Ultimate control. Now, no weapon gets fired unless they allow it at someone that they want to be killed. Now, you thought if Australia was truly an independent nation, they would have learnt their lesson from the F-18 and how hard it was to get the code so they could actually use the planes how they wanted to. And no, they lined up and bought the F-35, but I dare say, rather than sort of being sprung after the sale, which is probably what it would have done back in the 80s, they're now just up front and say, no, we control them. You can pay for them and your pilots can sit in them, but the American military will control exactly how they're used. Now, the Germans have also signed up for this F-35, although they are also going to maintain a separate fighter wing and option with the European-made planes. But perhaps they got wind, of the contract details. Oh, what's this clause about the codes? Yeah, you don't get those. You just get the planes. Another point I want to raise with these, computer-coded controlled weapons is US weapons for Ukraine disappearing into a black hole, CNN. So here's the bullshit they want you to believe. The US government is scrambling to trace large quantities of lethal aid. They have almost zero ability to follow the shipments into their final end users. Now, someone pointed out, if you can track where a consumer good from China is at any point in time where it is in the world, well, they'll know where these big weapons are, particularly in the missile systems. But anyway, they want you to believe that a worried senior defence official said they might wind up in the hands of other militaries and militias that the US did not intend to arm. How could anyone believe this nonsense? Did anyone get the sack? Isn't there like an urgent task force combing the world for these things? Are they trying to hunt them down? Well, of course not. They know exactly where their end destination is, and they have the codes to determine whether they get fired or not, or used. It's well established and reported that as soon as Corona arrived on the scene, garden variety terrorists, as they painted it out to be, and the flu virus, well, they disappeared, went on holidays. Now, flu can sort of be explained by what they were testing for and what they weren't testing for and reporting, which was flu. So it's probably still there. They just weren't mentioning it. But according to them, it was gone, got on holidays. Now, your terrorists, that's a different kettle of fish. The terror attacks in Europe pretty much dried up by 2020. Same as over in the States. As you can see, it's pretty regular up until May 2020. In Australia, 2014, 15, 16, up to 2018. You could probably consider from an Oceania perspective the Christchurch mosque shootings in 2019. You could probably throw them in with Australia. You know, it's always said to be close to home. Now, they've decided that they're going to start reporting on flu again. So flu's now returned. And call me a crazy conspiracy theorist, but I have a funny feeling terrorism's coming back with those weapons. They didn't mean to lose, playing a big part all across the world and being played more and more by this demographic, this man bad caricature they got going. So with the disarm Europe, pretty much, except for the stuff they're getting from America that they probably won't be able to use when they need to, up against newly armed terrorists, probably with the very weapons that they gave to Ukraine. Oh, you can see where this is heading. Those missing weapons, they won't just be stockpiled in Europe, they'll be all over the place, including here in Australia. So I think we're going to cop it as well. All right, that's it for this one.